Okay, so we're going to have a look at Rhapsody on a Windy Night, and we're going to sort of go through it pretty quickly. We're obviously gone through it with a lot of depth in class. So we're going to make some connections with some of the other poems as well. So obviously when we start off, Rhapsody is an episodic movement of work. The big thing here is that when you first sort of engage with the Rhapsody, it doesn't seem like it makes sense, but then by the end, there's some connection within the disconnection. So almost a Rhapsody within itself is a paradox. And when we link it back to the love song and prelude, which both had musical elements, we see an immediate connection with the musical elements. When you think about the Rhapsody, though, on a windy night, there's something beautiful about that title, but the windy sort of element gives us an idea that there's an unpredictability, a little bit of chaos. Windy nights don't seem to be normal, or it seems to throw up some unusual sort of events. So on that basis, it sort of gives us a little bit of a feeling that there's this disconnected nature on this windy night, but somehow this will make some sense to us. So we start at 12 o'clock, and again, we've got that sort of time motif that Elliot uses quite regularly. And this one is going to descend, into the sort of later night, 1:30 and then 2:30, and continue on to 3:30 and then 4 o'clock before this, sort of individual gets home. So the time sort of, is that sort of descension into the sort of past the witching hour. And I guess essentially when things don't necessarily go as per usual, all right? There's an abnormality to the witching hour. Anything is possible at this time of the evening. So as it goes, along the reaches of the street held in a lunar synthesis, the lunar synthesis gives us another indication of this sort of astral element to the night, sort of supernatural elements of things that might happen. We also get this sort of sense of the street, which is repeated in proof rock and preludes. So we've got this idea of this sort of urban setting. But in this particular one, we've got the idea of this person walking along it, sort of quite late at night. So then we've got the sibilance of whispering lunar incantations dissolve the flaws of memory, and again the sibilance, which is very rhythmic and very beautiful sort of technique, is essentially juxtaposed to something like the flaws of memory dissolving, like we can't remember what is happening in our world. So again, in this modernist sort of trope, he gives us a form or a technique that is sort of lovely and romantic almost, but then he actually uses it to really shock us, okay, in terms of the imagery that he creates. When we sort of get to this sort of idea, I've got a lot of notes in there that you can read as you're watching the video, but essentially memory becomes part of the present. It's almost like there's this disorder and lack of chronology to what's happening in the poem, which would suit the idea of the Rhapsody, that it doesn't seem to make sense, but it'll make some sense. Now, when you think about memory, the present and the future, these are elements that do often mesh together. The past sort of informs the present and informs the future. The present, sort of makes sense of the past. You get this sort of sense that all of those parts of time are not necessarily as disconnected as they appear to be. So when we get to this street lamp, the street lamp sort of is a heavy sort of reference within the poem. It beats like a fatalistic drum, okay? So fairly simple technique of the simile, but it's sort of like flickering as he walks past these street lamps, which I again, maybe going too far, but potentially I think that links back to Guido that we had in, the Divine Comedy when he's, Dante's Inferno, and he's sort of, at the very start, the excerpt that he uses in Proof Rock actually has that allusion to Guido being the flickering flame. So it straight away brings us back to this part of, the truth, all right? So potentially at 12 o'clock, the truth is revealed. Just like when Guido thinks that he will, can tell Dante anything, that's when he actually is willing to tell and speak the truth. Then we've got this, midnight again is sort of personified as well. It's shaking the memory as a madman shakes a dead geranium. Now, there's a lot of references here to other texts like French symbolism, and essentially contextually he wrote this poem in France, so sort of makes sense that he would refer to the French sort of imagists almost, and it's another part of that imagism, that sort of like sort of striking image that he's trying to create. But the thing here is, the madman, number one, gives us the idea that there's some pretty sort of confronting people out past 12. But shaking a dead geranium is a folly. There's no sense to it. It's already dead. Shaking it's not going to bring it back. And we get the idea that based on how we might interpret the geranium, that there's a great futility to that action. Then we go to 1:30. We sort of go now from 12 o'clock, and the next few are half past. And there's a feeling of this incompleteness again, like the hour is not yet finished. We're sort of in the middle of an hour. So again, it gives us a little bit of a sense that there's things aren't quite right within the poem. Then we've got the street lamp, being sort of really sort of personified here and sort of talking. So first of all, it's sputtering and muttering, but when it actually speaks, it speaks about this woman who hesitates toward you. So again, when we think about Elliot's poetry and women, a woman hesitating towards you would be like a glimmer potentially of hope in terms of a relationship, but it's hesitant. And then by the end of the stanza, we see that the woman goes into a house. So again, it's like, if I go back to along the reaches of the street, everything seems within grasp for Elliot and his poetry, but nothing seems to be actually tangible and gettable. So in that sort of imagery that he's creating, it's like it's there but not quite there. So this woman hesitates towards you. She's in the light of a door, which opens on her like a grin. And then we've got this really like sinister image here that that the grin is like a man who is potentially sort of inviting a prostitute into his house, and there's a really sinister nature to the way that he's sort of like, it's like the door is opening and he's like devouring her or like sort of consuming her, which he becomes a predator in that sort of relationship. And even this, you see the border of her dress, which is a suggestion that you can essentially see her form and her figure, and there's like that sort of nudity, and again that more sort of like erotic sort of image that they're trying to create, that this poor lady is giving herself away. Okay, so again, when we talk about like the idea in Prufrock of like Dante's Inferno existing within our world, well, this isn't too far away from that. Then when we get the idea that her dress is torn and stained, we get the sense that like her life isn't necessarily all rosy. Okay, so despite the fact that she is, I guess getting involved in this act of sort of sexual depravity, then that she maybe doesn't have the choice or the options because of the way that her life is going. The fact that it's torn and stained with sand will get back to a later image in the next stanza, but also sort of links us into the crab in Prufrock, which we sort of stated doesn't go forward, sort of moving sideways. And again, this is probably another symbol from Elliot that the world is not moving forward. Okay, that it is at a standstill. Potentially even it's couple that with the imagery around dissension, it's actually going backwards. And you see the corner of her eye. So the corner of her eye is like, just a furtive image, like it's only a little bit of it. We've got the synecdoche again. And twist like a crooked pin gives us back to the pin that we had in Prufrock. And the fact that it's twisting, and when you think about the last line, the last twist of the knife, feels like twisting is like the final insult. Okay, so the twisting of the corner of her eye is again almost, it could be potentially her pleading with the character that we are sort of reading and saying like, please help me, or it's like almost a look of resignation about what she's about to go and do. So then we get back to this idea of memory, and And remember, sorry, in that previous stanza, that is essentially the street lamp observing, the world as it sort of meanders by and telling the truth. Okay, like I said, like that sort of relationship with Guido. Then we've got the memory throwing up high and dry, a crowd of twisted things. And again, we've got this idea of twisting, that doesn't really seem to be a very positive image around the twists. And then we get a twisted branch. Okay, so again, we've got all of these senses of things being sort of twisted and not straight, not normal, not the way they should be. So we've got that sense of abnormality still in this witching hour and this like late night. And obviously this is a really incongruous image. Like, why would you have a twisted branch upon the beach in a street? Okay, so again, we've got this like disconnected nature. And again, like hopefully, we'll connect it as we go through. So this has been eaten, smooth and polished. And again, so like we thought we had this sort of quite natural image, but now we've got this sort of sense of the fact that it's almost like a bone. Okay, so the idea that it looked like it was smooth and polished as being sort of like nice, then it's as if the world gave up. Like we're stripped away of our sort of flesh and our being and our essence. And now all we are is, the secret of its skeleton. We're stiff and white, absent of color, absent of life. Okay, so again, like we think we're getting this really nice image of this smooth and polished, piece of branch, but now we've got this stiff and white sort of bone essentially with no life, sort of clinging to it. Then we go to a quite different image about a broken spring in a factory yard. Brings in, I guess, that urban sort of sense that is sort of a part of Elliot's context, the effects of the industrial age, and then it's got rust that clings to the form, and rust sort of the water and the corrosion is again a parallel to the world. Okay, that the world is corroded, and the strength is left. All right, so the strength of character, the strength of society, the strength of humanity, all those things are again descending and decaying and denigrating. And now it's hard and curled and ready to snap. Okay, it's like it's so tense that anything could actually make it fall apart completely, which is a very negative image. All right, so when we think about the start, we had the beach sort of smoothing out this bone or this branch that became a bone, and then we've got this industrial thing. So we have this sort of natural aspect, and then we have this industrial aspect, but they're both decaying and denigrating and getting worse. Then we get to 2:30, and we're sort of continuing on into the evening. The street lamp again now is commenting again to us, seeing what it sees in the world. And it says, have a look at this cat. And we go back to Prufrock's cat, which is, remember, like the woman, it's got like that sort of sensuous nature. But it's, again, remember, he used it as almost like a toxic, sort of yellow gas that was existing within the world of Prufrock. But this one, it flattens itself in the gutter, slips out the tongue, and devours a morsel of rancid butter. So it's again doing those things, but it's in the gutter like the sparrows from Preludes. It's almost the bottom feeding, a little bit like the crab. And when it devours this morsel of rancid butter, it's a bit like the man back up sort of here devouring this girl that comes in, opening on her like a grin. So we've got these sort of, even though they're really different, we've got these sort of connections between some of these images. And then after that, sort of the lamp saying that, we come out of the lamp telling us that sort of, that sort of potentially toxic sort of wasteland sort of thing of the cat sort of having to survive on rancid butter, potentially risky. And then we've got, the hand of a child, which is a totally different thing, automatically slipped out and pocketed a toy. But just like the cat getting the butter, the kid's getting a toy that was running away on the key. And when you looked behind the eyes of that particular young child, there was nothing to see, as if it is his own eye in that memory. Like it's almost like he's seeing himself do it, like in the past, which would mesh that sort of past, present, future sort of element of the poem almost as one. And I've seen eyes in the street. We've again got the synecdoche and the continuing motif of the street, trying to peer through lighted shutters, which for me is like in Preludes, we're inside looking out and opening our dingy shades, but this time we're now inside looking the other way. Oh, sorry, we're on the outside looking in to those lighted shutters. and a crab. Okay, so we get back to this crab from Prufrock, one afternoon in a pool. Again, very different sort of image here, very natural, but it's an old crab with barnacles on its back, and this sort of parasitic sense is sort of like that it's stealing the crab's nutrients, and essentially in society we're almost doing the same thing. It gripped the end of a stick, which I held him. It's like he's controlling it. The street was held. He's trying to hold this crab. There's a desperation here in the gripping, but there's not a lot of control. Okay, it's like there's a lot of things that are beyond the sense of this particular persona. Then we moved to 3:30. The lamp sputtered. The lamp muttered in the dark. Okay, now we've got, before we had through the spaces of the dark. Initially when we looked at the initial parts of the lamp here, and then now we've got it's just in total darkness. Okay, which is sort of ironic on the basis that sorry, this doesn't seem to be. Here we go. So when we, oh no, okay. Not sure how that's recording. It looks very blurry. Okay, let's focus again. Then we've got this sense that the lamp is completely in the dark, which is ironic because lamps usually give light. That the lamp hummed. Regard the moon. So again, the lamp is now talking, but that's a more nice sort of way, humming. But it maybe gives us that idea of the witchery, the sort of incantation, the spell. And now the lamp is saying regard the moon. So have a look at the moon. It uses this French la luna ne garde au, which I didn't pronounce right, but it says the moon does not keep grudges. So the moon sees everything. It's universal. It's been there probably from the start of time. So it's seen the history of mankind. And the moon, she winks a feeble eye. She smiles into corners, a little bit like the prostitute out of the corner of the eye. She smooths the hair of the grass, a little bit like the bone, smoothing and polishing. But the moon wants to connect, but remember the moon's a long way away. And when it says the moon has lost her memory, it's like the moon can't remember when the world was a better place. The moon is, sort of losing and getting so old that it's becoming decrepit too, just like the world is. When you then get this negative sort of imagery of a washed out smallpox cracks her face, it's sort of like diseased and infected, and then her hand twists a paper rose. We've got this twist again, and again the paper rose is fake like the geranium, the dead geranium, but even worse now, it's paper. It's not even natural or real. Then we've got the smells of dust and old cologne, which again, potentially goes back to the man who is, opened the door and grinned on our prostitute, and we've got that reference back to Prufrock as well, around this sort of olfactory sense of the smells, of what is happening in this depraved society. She is alone. So the moon is alone. We're alone. There's a great sense of loneliness, isolation, and separation. Then we've got these old nocturnal spells. Okay, so like the smells of the night, the cross across her brain is the end now of the lamp speech, and it ends with a fairly confusing sort of idea: the cross across her brain. So there's so much going on for the moon, and a lot of the world's history, potentially even the cross of Jesus Christ, and there is some references throughout Elliot's poem to religious sort of imagery, so it wouldn't be out of line to suggest that. But then we come back now to the reminiscence. It comes. So we always get back to the memory, but we might not necessarily control it, and that would be, like in stream of consciousness, that would be accurate. But we've got this sunless, dry geranium, so we return back to the dead, lifeless geranium, but now it's even more exaggerated. It's sunless, it's dry. I can't exist and survive in that. So, and nor can we as humanity. And dust is in the crevices. So again, we've got this death and decay everywhere. It's everywhere. You can't avoid it. It's in the crevices. It's all over the place. Then we've got the smells of chestnuts in the streets. We've got like a street vendor, which is a fairly literal sort of idea. Female smells in shuttered rooms. So again, we've got this prostitution and this sort of gross imagism of female smells through sort of sexual intercourse. And the shuttered rooms, again, we're hiding it away. We're trying to sort of say it doesn't happen, but the moon sees all, okay? And while the memory is lost, it's almost like the moon doesn't want to see, because it's the debauchery and the effect of it is, that our base behavior is all that the moon can see. We've got cigarettes in the corridor and cocktail smells in bars, which goes back to Prufrock's narrow streets and the reference to the drinking and the debauchery in the early parts of Prufrock when he's walking the streets. And we've got this like polysyndeton with the continuing ends, okay, to sort of accumulate the debauchery. Then in the final sort of stanzas or the final sections, we've got the lamps again speaking. Now it's just said, it's not sputtering or muttering, it just said 4 o'clock, and there's a bit more confidence in the lamp, a bit more matter of fact. We've got the time motif again. Here is the number on the door, memory, again saying basically, do you even know where you live? And it's directing the persona now. You have the key, all right? Now, you have the key to open the door, but you have the key potentially, in a call to arms or a more didactic sense, is you potentially have the key to change. Like the key could be a little bit more symbolic there if you wanted to interpret it that way. The little lamp, again, a fake light now. It's not, and it is working, but it's like not like that natural light. It's so that false light spreads a ring on the stair. You mount, you basically walk up the stairs, the bed is open, the toothbrush hangs on the wall, and look at the mundane sort of existence of life. Put your shoes at the door, sleep, prepare for life. But what is life? Life is to go back to the factory or to the industrial sort of setting and start again, and just go through this sort of nothingness of existence, which is, in essence, part of the, sort of modernist time frame and context. And then this is the last twist of the knife. In essence, that the persona will, at this stage, will, go back into this sort of mundane existence, and any excitement or any, sort of interesting aspects that occurred to it, to the persona in the context of the poem in the night, that wasn't really positive anyway, now descends back into this normality that is, totally like Prufrock. There's no excitement or no sort of energy in the world. So pretty like, disconnected sort of idea. But when you get to the end, you sort of go, yeah, well, like there are a lot of connections, the twisting, and it's like the twisting of our life. It's like almost, twisting life out of us. So not an overly positive sort of image of the world, but a very good poem in terms of the way that it constructs ideas. Thanks, everyone.